Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Just Finance Foundation proudly sponsors Teachers Talk Radio for Talk Money Week. Join us from Saturday the 4th of November for a week of incredible guests and thought-provoking discussions on how teachers can talk about money in the classroom. Tune in, be inspired, and empower the future generation. Teachers Talk Radio, sponsored by Just Finance Foundation, helping children manage money wisely. Visit our website for the schedule and details, justfinancefoundation.org.uk.
Could be great. So this is our final Talk Money Week show, which is in collaboration with Just Finance Foundation. So as part of our Talk Money Week, we've had 4 shows. So you can go back and listen to any of the shows, including today's show. We had loot boxes and skin benefits back on Saturday with Craig DeVos from Gamecast and Hayley Coyner talking about kind of the values in terms of kids buying loot boxes and things and how they associate money with that, and the pros and the cons and the gambling aspect of those games and using money in that way. Then back on Monday, I had innovation in financial education, what support is available for teachers. And on that show, I was joined by Paul Street and Emma Moulton, and from the Just Finance Foundation, and Lisa Davis from the Money, Savings and Pensions. And we were able to discuss some of the amazing resources they've got on their website and how teachers can use those. And then yesterday, Tom had the credit unions, what the difference financial education. So he had Danielle and Ravi on talking about their savings scheme, which leads me on to tonight. So tonight we are going to be looking at how is financial education equal? So adapting financial literature for alternative traditions and learners with SEMH. So feel free to comment or ask any questions throughout the show, and we'll do our best to answer them. So I think I've got, tonight is going to be one of those slightly confusing nights. I've got Sarah and Sarah with me tonight. So I've got Sarah Johnson, who's an influential author, educator and strategic leader in the field of education. She's a member of the Department of Education's Alternative Provision Stakeholders Group and also president of the PRU USAP. So these strategic positions allow her to demonstrate her dedication to improving educational provisions and outcomes from pupils in alternative settings. And I'm also joined by Sarah Barlow, who is a financial education expert from Just Finance Foundation, who is leading on the AP Provision Finance Education Research Project. She is passionate about supporting the vulnerable children and bringing out change in education sectors. She is currently using her knowledge and experience as a teacher to create adaptive financial education resources that support alternative provision schools around the UK. Thank you. I'm looking forward to tonight because not only, as I mentioned on the previous shows, I'm a mother of a 6-year-old and obviously very much started to understand money and the concept of money. But he's also got educational needs. So he is partially deaf and has other medical needs as well and goes to an SRB. So I am very much personally kind of have an understanding and want to know a bit more about this as well. So I'm really excited to host tonight and ask you guys some questions. So thank you very much for coming on. Should we start with Sarah? So I don't mind. Do one of you want to go first and introduce yourselves a bit?
Yep, I'm happy to go, Hannah, that's fine. So as you've just kindly introduced me, I'm Sarah Barlow. I now work for the Just Finance Foundation. I've worked with the Just Finance Foundation since February of this year. And prior to that, I was teaching in mainstream classrooms. I live in an area of social deprivation. And for me, it was very important to support the children in any way I could whilst I was classroom teaching, obviously. And then when I decided to leave, I wanted a role that really followed my moral compass, and I still felt like I was making a difference to the education of children in the UK. And I came across this role, and it has been an absolute delight. I mean, it's very, very different from classroom teaching, as I'm sure you can imagine. But like yourself, it's very interesting that you've shared a little bit of your family, your personal family life. Very, very much similar reasons for why I wanted to take on this role and was, so honoured to be leading on the AP project. I've got two children. Both of them have been on the SEND register. My youngest has got a lot of issues, which is actually how I came across Sarah Johnson, who's on the call with us, and made connections with her and followed a lot of her information. I mean, for me, she's a real powerhouse in the world of SEMH, and someone that professionally I really respect and look up to. So I'm absolutely delighted to be, sharing this session with her. But I think that's it for me. I think, like you say, you're looking forward to learning something from tonight's session, and I hope you do. And I think that's what's so important with education. That as professionals working in the sector, that we don't ever get to a point where we don't want to continue learning, where we do want to, soak up that information so that we can better the education, lives for the children. So yeah, that's why I'm here tonight. And delighted to hand over to the other Sarah now.
Hiya, thank you. That's an overwhelming introduction to myself a little bit as well. I'm honoured to be in this group. My name is Sarah Johnson. I'm the president of the national organisation PRUSAP, which represents pupil referral units and alternative provision. I've worked in PRUS and AP for the last 20 years. And that includes children who might be at risk of exclusion, excluded from school, might be involved in youth offending teams, but also might be children that are too poorly to attend school for lots of different reasons. I like the fact that we've all introduced that, we're mums and this is what we do. I'm just coming from putting two little girls to bed. I've got three children under the age of 2. So if I sound tired, it's because I am. But that two of my girls have cerebral palsy as well. So I think my interest in education and making sure children have access to education has only been kind of furthered with the most recent birth of my children as well. And yes, work in social, emotional, mental health, and have recently had 2 books published as well, is something that's really important to me. And I'd just like to thank you for inviting me on to talk about it.
And so, should we kicking it off? What do you think the current issues are around kind of PRUS settings and being able to make sure that kind of financial education is delivered correctly?
I'm happy to jump in first. We're going to have to call us by our surnames, I think, to make this a little bit earlier, Johnson. So I would say that in terms of children attend alternative provision, is that the only kind of unifying factor about some of their experience around education is that often it's been disrupted and fragmented in lots of different ways. So what that means in terms of education is that they might have missed quite significant chunks of particular kind of learning opportunities. So for example, we talk about the sequencing of the curriculum, that if a child is not there for several days, several months even, they might have missed some kind of core aspects around literacy, around numeracy as well. And there was it was 2019 research undertaken by the National Literacy Trust that looks at the relationship between children's reading and their financial capability and their general academic motivation. And they specifically wanted to kind of look at those children that have good reading skills, for example, were 4 times more likely to have good financial skills than their peers who have poor reading skills. And children and young people with poor reading skills are 4 times more likely to also have poor financial skills. And if you kind of think about that in the context of pupil referral units, that those children are most vulnerable to having gaps in their reading literacy skills and therefore also their financial literacy. And the idea about perseverance, that actually with financial capability, there needs to be quite a significant amount of understanding about the words that we use as well. So for example, if I were to say to you the word debt or profit, you might understand quite simply, but children that might also have social, emotional, mental health needs or communication interaction needs, that those kind of abstract words become really difficult to understand, and they need to be unpacked. We also know that children in pupil referral units are more likely to have special educational needs, but they're also more likely to be on free school meals as well. So thinking about these ideas of poverty and deprivation, we want to make sure we target the most vulnerable children to have missed their education, but also be needing to be in the best position to understand income and outgoings and being able to budget and fund accordingly.
Because that's the thing with kind of children from kind of free school meal backgrounds, they might not necessarily have like a positive experience with money and always be in school that kind of idea that other people can always afford things and they can't, and have a negative kind of connotation. How do you kind of rebuild that and so they have like a positive relationship with money?
I think, I mean, I'm someone that was on free school meals when I was younger, and also had dyscalculia as well. So sort of those ideas around kind of financial literacy were very important. And I think money, yeah, I think you're right to say that money often has a lot of embarrassment around it, not having enough uh, to be able to kind of to be able to clothe and feed yourself in the way that you want in your families. And I think it's about empowerment, making sure children have the skills to understand what resources are available to them and how to utilize them. I mean, I don't want, but also support them in being able to budget effectively, not get in debt, and understand where risks are with sort of certain money situation. And also, children in PRUs and AP, like many children, find it difficult to defer their gratification. So if we can kind of teach them around actually things like saving and interest rates, I think that also helps around those kind of deferring gratification rather than chasing the immediate money, but seeing how actually you can invest money in the future and what it might look like. That's quite complex, and for not all children will be able to kind of um, benefit from those. But I think certain specific programs can start to build that gap when they might not have those experiences around investment within their own kind of close families.
And I mean, that's what us as an organisation have, that was our key driver, really. I totally agree with what Sarah's just said. I think from my point of view personally, I am acutely aware that, not all children experience money in the same way as each other, just in the same way as Sarah's just pointed out, that no child learns in the same way. We've got children within a classroom, particularly in AP and PRU settings and SEMH schools, that have very, very different learning needs to their peers, even in that alternative provision setting. And I think for me, what was so powerful about leading on the project and getting to collaborate with people like Sarah and asking for their advice in certain areas was that we don't believe that any child, should miss out on financial education that could help shape their future well-being. So that if that means, as an organisation, we do adapt resources and create new resources, that was our key driver for the project, really.
Because that project is that's the one that's kind of funded from the Money and Pension Service, and it's kind of directly in support of kind of pupil referral units and behaviour support units. So how have you kind of had to change and adapt the resources in order to support those kind of units?
Yeah, you've absolutely right, Hannah. Yeah, it's the Money and Pension Service who have funded this project. And just to give a little bit of background on how that came about, the main Lifesavers team, so Just Finance Foundation, did actually do some work with and already had on using the Lifesavers resources, a small number of specialist provisions who were Lifesavers schools. And they asked them, they went to those AP and PRU settings that were part of the mainstream project and asked them, would they have an interest in taking part in a project like this? And, I think they helped them to create the bid. And Just Finance Foundation were obviously very successful. And the reason for that was obviously, as an organisation, we were looking at helping these vulnerable children in alternative provisions at the same time that the Money and Pension Service wanted to fund projects to help children in similar circumstances. And I think it's safe to say that, Sarah has very well articulated the fact that the children that are catered for in these provisions, really need to learn life skills to build the foundations for adult life. And it's so important because I think all the educators and members of SLT that I've met throughout the project, it's so clear how passionate they are. They want to see those children that are being educated in these settings flourish. They want to see them flourish independently, and not to be taken advantage of in their later life, and for their vulnerabilities that they may be experiencing as children, not to impact their future learning journeys. So I think for me, I obviously have professional knowledge of a lot of learning needs and SEMH needs, but for me it was to go out to speak to the people who were on the ground. It was to go and make the visits to the children, speak to the children themselves, speak to the teachers within those settings, and find out what they really wanted, because that was so important. I mean, as an organisation, Just Finance Foundation wants to keep teacher autonomy. That's why we offer teacher guidance, and the CPD sessions that we offer are to empower the teachers to deliver financial literacy. But I think for me, it was incredibly important to visit and hear the voices of the children themselves and see what they wanted. Because, I mean, Sarah, I'd love to come to you in a minute and ask your opinion on this, but I think sometimes the sort of feelings in the education sector, not with professionals necessarily on a one-to-one basis, but I think sometimes alternative provisions and pupil referral units can almost feel overshadowed by mainstream education, and they are the children who are most vulnerable and need interventions with financial literacy. So for me, it was like I say, very important to get their opinions and hear those voices, because I think alternative provision has maybe had a bad press, and I'm sure Sarah can say more about her feelings on that with her role as president of PRU's AP. But I think for me, it was such a joy to be able to go and do the visits and actually have some data that backs up the changes that we've made with the resources and the resources we've created.
I think you're right to say around that actually pupil referral units and alternative provision, I think especially in the last 20 years, going back 20 years, they were seen as places where kids were essentially entertained and engaged, to make quite a youth working approach. And there's nothing wrong with youth work either. I've been a youth worker in the past, but less around their education and about building their skills academically. And there's some amazing AP and pupil referral units around the country. And I think that view of AP has shifted, that it's no longer a dumping ground for children, but really is about offering that alternative provision. But I think what you also have in alternative provision and pupil referral units is staff that are incredibly skilled, and they might be teaching actually a number of subjects. And the reasons for that is economies of scale, that you might have smaller provisions, for example, with less children, and so therefore you have less staff that might not have the same kind of academic backgrounds as what you might have within your mainstream school. You're unlikely to have a teacher with a history degree and a history qualification teaching history, an English teacher with an English degree, and so on. So then you need to even more make sure that those teachers are empowered, not just the children, to have the tools and resources in which to teach things like financial capability, English literacy, and so on, so they can access the curriculum. And I think you're right to say that PRUs and AP are often forgotten when it comes to kind of curriculum arrangements and projects and ideas. They are kind of like the second class citizens, I suppose. I know that's a cliche, and they're often forgotten about. And yet these are the children that have the most significant needs. And if we can make sure that we're meeting those needs, then it's to follow that if we can meet those children's needs with quite significant needs, that can possibly be mapped over in mainstream to make sure that children don't even necessarily attend pupil referral units in alternative provision in the first place, because they are more well included within mainstream.
Just Finance Foundation proudly sponsors Teachers Talk Radio for Talk Money Week. Join us from Saturday the 4th of November for a week of incredible guests and thought-provoking discussions on how teachers can talk about money in the classroom. Tune in, be inspired, and empower the future generation. Teachers Talk Radio, sponsored by Just Finance Foundation, helping children manage money wisely. Visit our website for the schedule and details, justfinancefoundation.org.uk.
Do you think that, obviously with everything being more digital, especially since kind of COVID, that because they don't necessarily have that regular contact with physical cash, that there's less kind of kind of literacy in finance because they don't have that concept of real money. Is there a bigger gap now than there used to be?
So I'll jump in quickly. I think concepts around money are becoming increasingly abstract. Um, I think whilst kind of coins and notes are really important, actually, I think you're right to kind of recognize that often we do it through card or even for our mobile phone now, don't we? You can just open up your wallet on your mobile phone and pay for something. So I think those kind of abstract ideas are quite difficult. I think when you have tangible resources where you can look at your 10p coins that might be fake and then understand them and so on, but actually the world has changed significantly. It's not just about £10, £1, 20p's, but it's also about things like Bitcoin and all manner of different things that I have no idea about. I'm sure my financial literacy is particularly poor, but I think children to be able to understand those things is really important. And unfortunately, poverty and deprivation is only getting worse within this background and these changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree, Sarah. And I think that's what I've noticed going into the provisions that I've been into is that obviously, as you've pointed out, a lot of the children, I mean, some recent data that I read said up to 95% of the children currently in AP had an SEND need, whether that was being met or unmet at the time of position. And for me, I think my knowledge professionally has always been that, children who do have a lot of SEND additional learning needs find those abstract concepts very, very difficult a lot of the time to understand. And I think that's why I would always root for schools using physical resources, putting coins out on tables. We've all seen the plastic money that you can get, but if there's real coins to use as well, just keeping that concrete resource available. Because I mean, I'm sure you yourself, Hannah, have used concrete resources within all sorts of lessons. I mean, I remember maths lessons where I'd use multi-link cubes and I'd use the tens frames, and I would really like to see that that's commonplace within schools, that there's cash regularly handled by the children, even if it is just during a maths lesson or in role play. And I mean, I think for me, you're quite correct. The digital world is taking over. Cards are taking over. But I think for children, especially the children that I've been meeting with, it's not necessarily just the coin recognition that they're finding quite difficult. A lot of the children that I've met with, and quite frequently because of their financial circumstances at home, have a really difficult concept of understanding the difference between wants and needs. And I think that's what the resource development that I've undertaken has really focused on, is, trying to instill in the children that they can make choices with money, and making sensible choices with money is what's going to give them more financial security as they enter adult life. But yeah, you're right. It is quite a concern, and my desire is that every classroom ends up with some real cash on the table for the children to see.
Because that's the difference, isn't it? That I really like with your resources is that there's an emotional kind of response to money. It's not just, oh, if you spend this much, you say then it costs this much, and you have this much left over, and you could save that. But there's the whole kind of reflection in terms of what the consequences of that are, on how the money makes them feel, and can have a positive relationship, but they're thinking about it in a lot more depth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was really important for me, and I've had this conversation with my colleagues. I come from what anyone would describe as a true middle class family. We had 2 cars on the drive. We went on lovely holidays, and I went all the way through school. I was very academic, and then due to family circumstances, I moved out. I was very young. I was 17 when I moved out of our family home. And I had 2 part-time jobs, and I will be very honest and say I had absolutely no clue about money. I'd had such a fortunate childhood financially, but money and discussing money and salaries and pensions and mortgages was very much taboo in my household. It wasn't something that was discussed. And, both yourself and Sarah and myself on this call have, talked about our own children. And for me, it was very important that I didn't set that same standard for my children. I talk about finances a lot. I mean, I am very fortunate. I've got my own home and I've got a car and I can pay my bills. But there are some times now with the current economic climate that I say to my children, no, I'm really sorry, we can't afford that right now. No, we won't be doing that this weekend. And I think that's it. And I think for me, it's the resources that we've got at Just Finance Foundation they invoke that emotional response. They allow children that opportunity to speak about money and to break down those barriers to having the conversations about money. And I will always find we've got a resource called the 5 Big Questions, and my favorite 5 big question from that resource pack is, how does money make us feel? And I can literally pinpoint throughout my life, it flashes through my head every time I ask a member of staff the question or a child the question, and I can picture certain points in my life where money has made me feel very, very differently. And I absolutely relish the opportunity to be able to talk about money on a daily basis now, and to be able to instill that the power to children to be able to talk about it as well. And I think that was a key driver for me. After I'd done the visits in the AP project and I'd gone out to these wonderful settings that I'd visited, I looked at the data, and overwhelmingly both teachers and children at the settings that I'd visited had said that they wanted speaking and listening exercises. So I've actually developed, I think you would say, the 5 big questions, and I've created some conversation cards based on the 5 big questions that are part of the main Lifesavers financial education package. And I think, I'm hoping, obviously it's a pilot project, it's going out to the 20 schools that have taken part, but I'm hoping the feedback from that will be really positive, because it's quite a low stakes, informal way for children to discuss money, but really breaking down those barriers, but like you say, whilst evoking those feelings and talking about it in not necessarily a very formalized learning way, and not in a sort of mathematical way of, you've spent X amount of money, how much change have you got? It's very much more about how that money can make you feel and what you can do and how you can look after it. And the conversation cards themselves touch upon some quite sensitive issues, but issues that have been made quite clear to me throughout the visits that children are struggling with. There are children within the settings that I've visited whose parents have gambling addictions. So there are some questions about debt, and whether once you're in debt you can ever get out of debt. And that obviously will give the teacher who's facilitating that lesson the opportunity to open that discussion with a child, be able to reassure them, but also offer them a different path for their financial future. And I think there's got to be a lot of power that comes from that.
There's that aspect of as well of children with SEMH. If like you said, if they're told no, that sometimes they can kind of struggle to regulate with that answer if it's something that they want. I know that, like my son, if he wants something, and I'm currently selling my house and moving for that, so my mortgage has raised exponentially, and kind of be like, I can't afford that right now, and having that conversation with him. But he's now kind of changed his wedding. He's like, when we move, can I have? But to begin with, it was kind of like, that's not fair. And especially it's getting them to understand. And there is that additional layer, isn't it, to it with kids with additional needs in terms of how they understand their feelings. And that's why it's kind of, this is really great resources, because these students, they need that extra layer as opposed to just being told no by their parents. They need to be able to understand it in a little bit more context.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've just read Sarah's new book. Sarah's just got 2 new books out, actually, one SEMH for primary and one for secondary schools. And I've just read the primary one, and Sarah talks about that in the book. She gives teachers throughout the book tips on how you can sort of help regulate children with additional needs within the classroom. And I read it partly for professional development. And I got a lot from that, because even though in my home I've got a child who struggles to regulate a lot of the time, you're right, dependent on the difference or a different need that particular child has, they are also very different. And I think for me, that's why the impact of the teachers, those professionals who are on the ground teaching these children day in, day out, the bonds that they have got with the children. And I mean, Sarah's spoken about this previously, but I think, and feel free to chip in, Sarah, but I think Sarah's view, I've listened to a podcast that Sarah was on recently, and Sarah's view is that obviously within an alternative provision classroom, the ratios are obviously quite a lot smaller than they are in a mainstream classroom for the children's needs. That's apparent. But I think what that allows to develop is that that professional relationship between the pupil and the teacher and whoever's, you know, educating them in that at that particular time, and allows them to be able to diffuse situations possibly better than in a mainstream classroom. You know, I've been in a mainstream provision. I've had 30 children by myself. I've had children with additional needs and SEND needs within that classroom, and it can be difficult. I'd never ever discount that it is not difficult, but I think what's so special about seeing how the staff in the settings that I've visited help the children to regulate and really appreciate their needs. And I think it would have been very easy for me to create some resources that literally just said, here you go, this is all about financial education, you know, read them from this page of a book. But that's not what any of our Lifesavers resources are about. It is very much meeting the needs of the children, and these resources have just gone that little bit further for children with SEND and SEMH needs. And I think that's of great importance to myself, and I also believe, you know, of great importance to Sarah as well, that we've got education provision in place, no matter what it's for. Obviously, I am specialising in financial education and very honoured to be doing so. But I think whatever sort of information you're trying to instill into children is to try and best meet their learning needs as well as you can.
I think the fact that the resources are bespoke, and it's not just about, okay, you're a blank canvas, let's support your financial literacy in this way, but actually having a deeper understanding of the social, emotional, mental health and the relationship, the emotive relationship with money and finances, and sort of understanding that is really important. And I think those ideas around self-regulation, of sitting with disappointment, I think is really difficult, isn't it? You know, I know that I'm disappointed when I can't afford X, Y, Z, but I'm able to hopefully contain that and not just react quickly. And I think part of that is because I have sometimes a better self-regulation than some of the children that we work with, but also having an understanding that I can wait and things will get better, or I can do X, Y, Z to kind of improve my situation. And I think financial literacy is often, and social, emotional, mental health is coupled with these ideas about I can't think what the word is, it's just gone out of my head, around impotency, that you can't make a difference, and that all these things are happening around you, and you don't have you can't change it, but also you don't have an understanding of it. So that's why I think the bespoke resources that you've created by listening to children and listening to AP and pupil referral units will be so well received. Really excited about it.
Just to clarify, so I mean, I've been listening to all of the shows, and the resources from Just Finance Foundation have been great. So you go in and you coach the staff on the resources so that they're able to then deliver them correctly, just so people kind of who may not have listened to the other shows know exactly what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So the main Lifesavers programme, the project that I've just been leading on is slightly different, and I will explain that briefly to you. But the main Lifesavers programme, my team, the rest of my team don't tend to go in. It's not a direct delivery programme. I think in the same way that we've got, as one of our key drivers is to empower children for better financial literacy, we also believe that the best way to help the children with financial literacy is to empower the teachers to be able to deliver those lessons. I remember the days of direct delivery and someone coming in and running a session. And, you know, sometimes I would love that. I would love to mark, you know, the year 6 latest independent writing at the back of the classroom for an hour. However, it's a one-off lesson, and that's not what we want to offer as an organisation. You know, we want to give the teachers the skill set to be able to deliver this programme. as they see fit and as flexibly as possible. And so we've got schools who are main Lifesavers schools who do a Lifesavers lesson every couple of weeks. We've got some schools that rotate the 5 big questions, and they do one of the 5 big questions every half term, and they sort of use it as like a spiral curriculum almost. And we've got some that very much dip in and out and choose to use it as and when, and some that also use it in conjunction with, they use Jigsaw PSHE as their curriculum and use the financial resources as part of their PSHE curriculum when financial literacy comes up within those sessions. So I think for us, what it tends to look like is we would have a conversation with a member of staff from the school if they were interested in taking part, and briefly explain to them, what the sort of setup would look like for them. We would arrange to have a CPD session that is usually delivered via Teams, via Microsoft Teams. Sometimes, depending on the locality of the school, it could be an in-person. We've got financial coordinators scattered all over the UK. So if there is a school that's around the corner, I mean, one of my colleagues did a staff meeting in person last week, and he thoroughly enjoyed himself. He said it was so lovely to be, in a staff room again and meeting with the staff, and that was great. And we love to do that. We love being around fellow professionals as coordinators. And then once the CPD session has been undertaken, and we believe that the teachers are more confident, and 90% of our teachers feel much more confident once we've delivered the financial literacy CPD, the suite of resources will be delivered to the school. And then, like I say, how that school then chooses to use it, it's very, very flexible, and that's totally up to them. We obviously give them suggestions on how other schools around the country are using it, but it's not prescriptive at all. We don't say this is lesson plan 1, this is lesson plan 2, this is how you've got to set it up. The project, just very briefly, the AP project was run slightly differently. That was in 3 phases. So there was a research phase from March to July. There was the data analysis and resource creation over what formerly were my summer holidays, from sort of July to October time, and very exciting for me. But the resources have actually just today, at about 5 to 5 this evening, gone off to the printers. So any of the schools who were currently set up as part of the AP research project will be getting their brand new resources very soon. So that's slightly different in the fact that obviously I've done in-person visits for those. That's not typical, and that was because it was part of the Money and Pensions Service research project that was been funded. Yeah,
that's all had a really positive feedback, and you're hoping to gather more people for that project?
Yeah, absolutely. So far, it's been really, really well received. We are going to release a key findings report in the not too distant future. That will publish the available information that we found throughout the project, which is actually, like I say, I've been overwhelmed by the support I've received from alternative provisions and pupil referral units throughout England. It really has been so lovely to be able to go in and meet with the staff and the children. But yeah, I think for me, it's great. It's great to see it develop and evolve, and to get from where I was at the end of February when I took on this role, to finally almost have the resources in my hand is very exciting. And I'm sure when Sarah just published her books, I'm sure that day when she got those books, the physical copies in her hand, were the most exciting days for a long time. And I think that's what I'm now feeling about the resources. And I think moving forward, we would love to have more alternative provision and pupil referral units and SEMH units make contact, and be able to have these resources, because as Sarah said, although they're not individualised to specific schools, it is a bespoke package. We've listened to the data that we collected. It was very important for me to look at our findings and tailor those resources to best meet the needs of the children based on the findings. And for me, if more staff from alternative provisions and pupil referral units wanted to make contact and to look about having the alternative provision resource pack, it is as simple as, for me, I've created a resource that I truly believe removes barriers and will help engage the learners with additional needs and SEMH needs to being able to access financial education. And I don't think I could be any more happy with the result that we've got at this point.
How would pupil referral units and alternative provision would they just contact you to gain access to that? Because I can recognise that actually, I think so many organisations would really value this, the resources. Sorry, I've interrupted you as well. I'm a terrible speaker.
No, absolutely not. That's absolutely fine. Yeah, we have got a page on the main Lifesavers page on the Just Finance Foundation to be able to find alternative provisions. So if someone was to literally type in Google Just Finance Foundation alternative provision, it should come up with a page. The actual link is www.justfinancefoundation.org.uk/alternative-provision. But we haven't hidden it away. I would be more than happy to talk to some more wonderful members of staff from alternative provisions and SEMH settings that would like to hear more about the resources. Absolutely.
I can just say from listening to and hosting part of this Talk Money Week with Just Finance Foundation, every member of staff that works with you is so passionate about what they do, and they just really want to make a difference. And it is made by teachers for teachers. They are just amazing resources that are free, that are well developed. So it takes all the pressure away from teachers in a point in our academic kind of climate where work is very hard and it is very difficult and teaching is more stressful. So there's this amazing resource that's out there that's for free that people can access, and it can make a difference. And I think especially for those children that are in those provisions, it is really important, like you said, Sarah, earlier, about getting them their life skills, because I think the status is, isn't it, that generally the children from those backgrounds are less financially eloquent afterwards, so therefore they're not likely to do as well. They're more likely to not have jobs, or not be so financially stable, or even in some cases with educational needs, other people might be more financially responsible for them because they're not able to be responsible themselves. But that could potentially be because they just not had that education and that ability to be upskilled, to be able to be more supportive of themselves when they leave school. So it's such an important thing that you're doing in kind of upskilling these children, and even more important to be able to give it to the teachers for free is just amazing. So thank you for everything that you're doing. It's just been a great listening to you.
Thank you. No, I've really appreciated being on the show tonight. And that's it. You're quite right. We're all really passionate. We're all former educators. We've all been there and worn the T-shirt. We've all seen the children that we would still like to reach out and help. And I think it's a real honour to still be able to do that from the sidelines and offer something that's fully funded. And I think our passion shines through because we genuinely care. We really do want to remove those barriers to financial education for any children, but in my case, especially for those children in vulnerable circumstances. And I think we use our skill sets. We know where our areas of, where our skill sets lie. And for myself, obviously, I've got close lived experience of SEND and SEMH. So for me, it's second nature, to converse with people like Sarah who are experts in the area and to be able to remove those barriers. So thank you so much for having me on the show tonight, and thank you to Sarah for joining me. It's been amazing.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.